Well, hello, Calvary Cast listeners. This is your secondary host, Jess Miller, but I am introducing the podcast today, accompanied by my cohort here,
Cohort in crime.
Graham Parker.
There we go. That was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it felt natural. Did it sound natural? Did it sound
I think
like
so.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I guess the time will tell, but
Yeah.
it seemed like a natural thing to do. So
And we decided to have me intro because you're going to be doing a lot of talking today. A lot of blah, blah, blah. A lot of yapping of your gums.
we thought we'll spare the ears a little bit. Which, have you ever thought about, like, you listen to your own voice, and it always sounds weird.
Yeah, it does.
Like, people have told me I sound like Matthew McConaughey,
Really?
but I don't hear that.
Well, you got to let me hear it. Say, all right.
All right.
I don't know.
No, nobody's told me I sound like Matthew McConaughey, but I'd like to sound like Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, really?
That's what I'm
Okay.
saying.
All right.
I think I sound nasally.
Yeah. Well,
Are you affirming that? That
no,
hurts.
I don't think you sound nasally, but that's what you think you sound like.
Yes. So, no, listening to yourself is always a strange
It is.
endeavor. So
You shouldn't really like to listen to yourself. That would be weird.
nobody has a voice like mine. I just love
love my voice.
I love to listen. Said no one ever. Although there might be some people out there that do. They like listen. They listen to their own music.
Yeah.
You know, that.
Yeah. Well,
And put myself to sleep and listen to my recording.
I know a pastor once who said, I know this will sound weird. Well, he's a pastor, but also a professor. And he said, but I listen to my own sermons.
To like critique them?
Well, no, I think he listens to them for this purpose. And it made sense. Like, he wants to hear himself say what he's telling others.
Okay.
Let me think about it.
Mhm.
Like, because I've done that before. I've listened to a sermon or whatever of
Mhm.
myself, and then I've thought, man, this would be really good if I put this into a practice now. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, in other words,
you preach to yourself, literally.
You're preaching to yourself. You're reminding yourself of what you're saying to others. But I don't make a habit of that. But I think he did, is from the way he made it sound.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't either. What are you giving up for Lent? Or what did you give up for Lent?
I gave up Lent for Lent.
Yep, me
I
too.
just had a question about that, didn't we? So
Yes, we did.
Good discussion. We gave up Lent for Lent. We're not big Lent people here. Did you celebrate the holiday? It was yesterday?
What was yesterday?
International Women's Day.
Oh, of course.
Did you celebrate the international woman in your life?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, all day.
It's big holiday. Yeah.
So I took the day off. She worked, but I took the day off and celebrated her for her while she worked.
Oh man, that's great. That's
the kind of guy I am.
I'm not gonna say any more on this because we get in trouble. This is episode 74, which next time is our 75th episode.
That'll be a
And
big anniversary special.
Big anniversary special, but we need some ideas as to what we should do for our big anniversary special. If we should. Otherwise, we'll just probably do a normal podcast. But
And just mention that it's the 75th in the beginning.
There we go. Like we mention the number of the episode every podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
If maybe we could we pull together all the data of, or would we even want to do that?
Of the people that have listened to it?
Yeah.
No, but speaking of data, people that have listened to it, shout out to whoever it is that's been listening to our podcast in Spain.
Wow.
Somebody in Spain has been blowing up the podcast chart for us. They listened to 86 episodes.
Are you serious?
We don't
even have 86 episodes.
We do have 86 if you count that. Yeah. But we got 86 plays from Spain. I think it's a spam bot is what it is, because we often get these spammers that are like, they go and like the podcast. And
well, I was just trying to cycle through anybody that we would know in Spain, and I don't even.
Well, if you're going to listen to 86, which I think would be, we include the ones in there that we did for Easter and stuff.
Okay.
So that would be 86, but 86 episodes in a week would be a terrible punishment.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
especially those for like the first 1 or 2 or 3 where the sound quality was so bad and
right.
all that stuff. So
right. Are those still up?
They're still up. Yeah.
Because Well, we've talked about this before, but I worry people will listen to those, and then they'll be like, I ain't going to listen to this. This is ridiculous.
Terrible.
But we fix the sound.
Right, but
and
I
if
think
they don't
most
get to
people,
number...
You don't listen to podcasts in order, right? You go and find topics you want to listen to things like that.
That's true. And I've started new podcasts recently even that I don't even know what their first ones were. So I just am like scrolling the last few months.
That'd be a torturous thing for anybody to do. So if you're listening to this podcast the first time, don't go back and listen to the first ones. Just find ones you want to listen to.
You know what would be good, though, is if we did we did a new podcast on the reason for this podcast, which makes us actually, after 75 podcasts,
we could
try to narrow down what we're doing with this and what our objectives are again.
There's an idea.
Instead of that first one.
Yeah. We can think about that.
Maybe we should do that.
There we go.
All right, well, let me introduce today's topic.
You introduce today's topic.
Then you'll be doing a lot of talking about, because you're the one that's looked at this as you're studying through the Old Testament.
Yes.
This year and last year, because last year you brought the youth through an Old Testament survey. Mm-hmm. This year you're bringing some of the adults through an Old Testament survey. Mm-hmm. And so you've been spending tons of time in the book. But you're also, it's not just a traditional Old Testament survey. Aren't you? You're including biblical theology.
Right. I'm calling it a biblical theological survey of the Old Testament.
Right. So this week is an exciting topic. It is on Dendrology, or otherwise known as Xylology, which is, get this, the science and study of woody plants, trees, shrubs, and lianas. I don't know what a liana is. Specifically, their taxonomic classification. So,
you weren't supposed
listener,
to read that.
you listen to this. I'm going to take a nap.
Oh, man, I don't think I've laughed this hard in a podcast in a while.
Oh man. But I'm going to let you, honestly, this is Isaiah's biblical theology of Dendrology.
Dendrology.
Oh, Dendrology.
Isaiah's biblical theology of Dendrology. And Dendrology is, and I just looked this up because I was looking for a catchy title, and there's nothing more catchy than Dendrology. But looking for how we're going to look at how Isaiah uses all the imagery of trees, plants, tree, plant, stump, root, shoot, vine, vineyard. We're going to look at that imagery, which he's full of, and see what kind of story it tells us. You're supposed to go, wow, that sounds just
I'm sorry. Whoa, wait. Oh, yeah, no, this is great. Okay, good. We're wrapping this up now. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Okay, no, I'm kidding. So this is going to be good.
Here's the thing. Yep. So when we talk about in the biblical theology approach to the scriptures is basically you're looking at what is the whole story of the Bible and how do all the different parts of the Bible connect together to tell that story. And especially as we get into the prophets, I think this is where people always get lost. And a lot of times they get lost because of the imagery of it. So they think why in the world does he keep talking about a tree? Why does he talk about a root? Why does he talk about a branch? That doesn't make any sense to me. There's no it seems like application to us. Well, this is imagery, and what it's doing is it's presenting real world illustrations for abstract concepts, right? So that's what the imagery of the Bible is, and there is just, again, it's chock full of it, but this one aspect that I want to look at is related to trees and vines and branches and things like that, hence dendrology, and it's a fun word to say.
That is a fun word. Once you learn the right pronunciation.
All right.
So cool.
So here's my proposal. I'm just going to throw this out, and then we're going to kind of walk through these passages and see where we get. So my proposal is this, though, that Isaiah's usage of dendrological terms, so tree, vine, branch, root, stump, shoot, bow, vine, vineyard, helps tell the story and gives us images to understand how the Lord views the nation of Israel, their sin, what the Lord will do to them in judgment and in restoration, okay? And then beyond that, it helps us understand that the restoration of the nation will be brought about by an individual who is a descendant of David, who is also described with the same images.
Wow. Cool.
So that's kind of where we're trying to go with that. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
All right. Now, the other thing that we're going to see is these images that Isaiah is using, right? They're going to picture at first the health of the nation or lack thereof, and then how they will be revived. And so we can think about that even if you think about what a dead tree looks like versus a live one, what a drooping plant looks like versus a healthy one, okay? So those are all things that are kind of contributing. So we're going to start with this. The first 10 chapters, the dendrological imagery, if we can use that term, seems to picture that there is a need for an arborist, who's a tree surgeon, to come and cut out the rot of the sin. Say chapters 1 through 10. So like you start in chapter 1 and you have a verse like this, where it's speaking about the nation of Israel. It says, "For you shall be like an oak whose leaf withers, and like a garden without water, and the strong shall become tinder, and his work a spark, both of them burn together with none to quench them." So picture a tree that's going to be caught on fire, right? It's dry, it's tinder for a fire. So really the book is starting with judgment. The first 5 chapters are essentially judgment, also intermixed with salvation. But the Lord is dealing with the sins of Jerusalem, and especially in this passage, he's dealing with the sins of that city and how the Lord has turned his hand against them in judgment. And he says that has made them into like a dry oak tree where they're dead. And this will be, I think, more significant as we get to chapter 6 and see the image that is there. Then, as you move forward, you get to chapter 4, and in the middle of all these judgment passages, there is a future passage of hope, right? So it's speaking about, I'll read Isaiah 4, verse 2. "In that day, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel." So chapters 1 through 5 are predominantly words of judgment, but interspersed with hope. So here, this passage looks forward to this day that is of the branch of the Lord. Who's the branch of the Lord? Well, in almost all usages of it in the prophetic writings, it's speaking about the Messiah, right? Jeremiah calls it, I think it's in chapter 23, the righteous reign of the branch. So this is a messianic title. So the progress here, I think, that you're supposed to see in this image is that Israel is the dying oak, but their hope is found in the branch of the Lord, who is the Messiah. Okay, so there's this progress that's moving forward. Then you get to chapter 5, and here the image that is used is again spoken of the nation, and they're described as the vineyard of the Lord. And I'm not going to read the whole passage, but you can go read verses 1 through 7. And basically the story or the image is that the Lord planted the nation of Israel like a vineyard, and he did everything that was needed for it to thrive and to flourish and to produce grapes. But the problem was that it didn't produce it. He said, I planted it with choice vines, but what happened, I went to my vineyard and all it produced was wild grapes. It's not good for anything. You can't make good wine with wild grapes. So he says, what will I do with my vineyard? I will remove its hedge and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall and it shall be trampled. I will make it a waste. All right. So this is what the Lord is, again, this image that the Lord is using of the nation of Israel. They're a dying oak. They're a worthless vineyard that has to be trampled down and thrown out. So by the time you get to the end of chapter 5, you just see this is kind of these real world images or illustrations are giving us an understanding or helping us understand the spiritual state of the nation. That leads us to chapter chapter 6. And chapter 6 is, of course, quite familiar to us because that is Isaiah's call and commission to the ministry, of course, where he sees the Lord high and lifted up, the train of his robe filling the temple. And then, of course, the Lord says, who will go for me? Isaiah says, here I am, send me. And the Lord gives him a commission to carry out. And at the end of chapter 6, verse 13, we have this verse. It says, and though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. Okay, so this passage, I think, is really crucial. I think it's this one and then what we'll see in chapter 11 are two of the most crucial dendrological passages in the book. And the reason is because what the Lord is telling Jeremiah to do is to prophesy until the land is laid waste, till the people are carried away in exile. And then this image of a tree that has been cut down and all that is left is a stump is picturing basically the remnant of the nation, right? if you think it's an oak that's dried up, it's dead, what do? We got to cut it down. The only thing that's left is a stump. But there's hope in this because it says the holy seed is its stump. So it's like there's still life left in that stump and in those roots. I think about, and I told this to the adults the other night, if you've ever cut down an elm tree, they're like the worst, right? They're a weed, and they're always sending up these little shoots. Mm-hmm. So if you can picture that image, you can think about what he's talking about here in chapter 6.
Yeah. I think it's neat how God gives us different ways to understand different things. And so even in daily life, we're supposed to see in nature teachings.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing that all through Isaiah, and they drawing the people's attention to, even in their daily lives, teaching about God and thinking about those things.
Yeah.
And they'll say they're about working in their own vineyard or taking down a tree or whatever.
Right. They would totally understand this language and these concepts.
All of a sudden, these things come into their minds.
Yeah.
It's very creative.
It is. So chapter 6, verse 13 gives us this hope that there's this stump left, but there's a seed of life rooted in that stump. Then we get to chapter 10 and chapter 11, and in these intervening chapters are talking about the threat of the Assyrians to the nation of Judah and the fear that is in the heart of King Ahaz and some of those people. But there's also in these passages those wonderful promises of a Davidic king whose reign will last forever. And we get to chapter 10, and here you have a passage. Well, if you start in verse 20 of chapter 10, Isaiah is talking about a remnant returning from exile and what the Lord will do to return them, right? So he's going to, if you understand the history of the nation of Israel, in 586 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed and all the captives of Judah, or all the people of Judah, were taken into captivity in Babylon, and they were there for 70 years. But there was a promise that after 70 years and their dealings, the Lord had dealt with them for their sin, he would bring them back to the land. So here is partially that promise. But if you look at verse 33, it says, "Behold, the Lord God of hosts will lop the boughs with terrifying power. The great in height will be hewn down, and the lofty will be brought down. He will cut down the thickets of the forest with an axe, and Lebanon will fall by the majestic one." So I think it's interesting that he uses this image of a tree being cut down to help us understand what the Lord will do to other nations in order to restore them. So even as Israel looks at other nations, they're supposed to picture them as strong and healthy trees. And, Israel often look to other nations for deliverance. Well, the Lord's saying, well, here, I'm going to cut their tree down, right? And you may be a cut tree, but that gets us to chapter 11, which is interesting because we hear this. Chapter 11, verse 1, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit." So, just again, to take all of our imagery so far, Israel's a stump with a seed in it. The Lord's going to knock down all the trees of the other nations to whom Israel is looking, and then our attention is drawn back to the nation of Israel and that stump from chapter 6. And here we're told who is the stump, and it's Jesse. Well, what's significant about Jesse? He's the father of David, right? And out of that stump now comes life. So this is like just overloaded with messianic themes, right? You have Jesse, branch, right? We already talked about that in chapter 4. That's clearly a Davidic messianic title. And then this is picking up from what we saw in chapter 6. And then we get to chapter 11, verse 10. And after being told in verse 1 about this shoot that comes from the stump, this branch that's going to bear fruit, well, then we get to 11, verse 10. It says, "In that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall all the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious." So we know now that this shoot, this branch from the root of Jesse, is a person, right? This is the promised Davidic king. So from the nearly dead oak of Israel, life is found in the stump of Jesse and a branch from his roots, who will grow to be a king to whom all the nations will come. So people are supposed to find the hope of the nation in this coming Messiah, this coming king.
And do you think it was Isaiah's intention with these? He's interspersing these this imagery
Mm-hmm.
here for this very, like he's not,
Yeah.
it's not an accident or
not an
whatever.
accident.
He's just coming across, I know, I'll say this
No.
again or whatever. This is something that you're designed to trace
I
through.
think so.
Yeah.
Because of the way it's used and that it's built upon. I think he's absolutely wanting us to see it, which I think the other interesting connection that I noticed last time going through Isaiah is the usage of that in the same thing we just saw in 11:10, that the raising of a signal. So before he says, I will raise a signal and it will draw the nations for judgment. And then now in chapter 11, with his introduction of this individual, he's going to raise a signal for salvation, right? That all the nations are coming to him. So he's using the exact same phraseology to describe something different and to show you, look, this is how a transformation has come about. So that's where I think like imagery is really important, because they repeat these images and it helps you understand what's going on and how the transformation is going to come about.
Yeah, it's good.
So the next passage I want to jump to is chapter 27. And after basically from chapter 13 till chapter 27, it's almost all judgment. And a lot of it's judgment on the other nations and things like that. But 27, 1-2 is an interesting verse as we think about these vine, branch, root passages. Because it says, in that day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. In that day a pleasant vineyard sing of it. So what he's talking about is that the Lord is going to deliver Israel, and then he speaks of them, and he goes on to talk about how Israel is a vineyard, but now they're a pleasant vineyard. Well, that's, I think, supposed to be contrasted in our minds with chapter 5, where they were not a pleasant vineyard. They were, a vineyard that was good for nothing, and they had to be trampled down and left to waste, okay? This song about the vineyard continues on, and it tells us the Lord is the keeper of the vineyard, right? So all of this is to say the Lord has transformed the nation through judgment, and then he's saved them, right? So this is imagery describing that. Then you look at like 27 verse 6. It says, in the days to come Jacob shall take root, Israel shall blossom and put forth shoots and fill the whole world with fruit. So they're not only pleasant, but they're fruitful. They're filling the world as they were supposed to be. This was originally God's intention for the nation of Israel. Well, after judgment, he restores them and makes them to be what they should be. Then you jump ahead to like chapter 37, and I'm skipping over a lot of passages, but not every passage that uses root, vine, branch imagery like that applies in this way, right? It could be speaking about other things or describing the state of the nation at the time of judgment, things like that. But these are passages I think that are specifically we're meant to see kind of together in regards to the salvation the Lord will brings and who he brings it through, if that makes sense. So in chapter 37, this passage is part of a promise that's made to King Hezekiah. And 37:31 says, and the surviving remnant of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. And I think the thing that's interesting is in this whole context, so it's starting really in chapter 36, Hezekiah is afraid of the Assyrian nation, which again, and I'll just add this, if you don't know who the Assyrians are, think of Nineveh, right? Because that's where the Assyrians were. They were the dominant world power at the time. And the Lord gives a sign that the Assyrians will be destroyed. And part of that sign is found in this promise that the surviving remnant will not be destroyed, but they will be brought into the land again. They will put down roots and flourish, right? And ultimately the Lord does deliver Hezekiah and Judah. 185,000 soldiers are killed by the angel of the Lord in one fell swoop. But I think the interesting connection here is, again, this promise that after exile, after judgment, they will be brought back into the land. The nation will put its roots down, and it will flourish. The other thing that I think is interesting with this is because he says, they shall take root downward and bear fruit upward. Okay, I think that that's also connected to chapter 6 and chapter 11, which you see that same out of the stump comes fruit. Where's it going? It's bearing upward, right? I think you're meant to see all of this again, that the hope of the nation, the bearing of fruit, is found in this messianic deliverer. Okay. Then to build upon this even more, we jump ahead to chapter 53, which is probably the most familiar passage to Christians in the book of Isaiah, because of the promises, or the connections and the same things we see Jesus suffering for, right? Isaiah prophesies of all of this. So chapter 53, verse 2 says, "For he," so it's speaking about this Davidic messianic individual, "he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him." So I think the idea in this image is that this individual arises, and his arrival is unlikely. Even before it, at the end of chapter 52, it talks about, my servant shall act wisely, he shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted, as many were astonished at you. So the idea is that just as the nations were astonished at, really, I think, the arrival of the nation of Israel and their prominence and how the Lord worked through them, it was an unlikely thing. So the same thing with this coming Messiah. And he's pictured here as a root, a plant coming up out of dry ground. So if you picture like the desert, if you're just walking along on sand, it never rains there, and all of a sudden you see a young plant shooting up out of the ground, that would be a surprising thing because of the unlikeliness of that. So I think that's the image that we're supposed to see about this coming deliverer. And of course, then the rest of chapter 53 goes on to describe the sin-bearing work of the servant of the Lord. And all of this then culminates in chapter 60 and chapter 61, I think, where we look forward to the full realization of the new creation which the servant of the Lord brings in, and in which the nation, who is also known as the servant of the Lord, will dwell, right? So this is where we get to, familiar passages where Isaiah is saying things like, "For behold, I will create a new heavens and a new earth," right? And we have these passages describing this glorious time. So chapter 60 is part of that. We have language that's very similar to Revelation 20 and 21 when it's saying things like, "The sun shall be no more your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give you light, but the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory." So this is all, glorious new creation things that will come about because of the work of the servant. But then I find this interesting in chapter 16, verse 21. It says, "Your people shall all be righteous. They shall possess the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I might be glorified." So I think in chapter 60, what we're seeing here is that the nation is described as being a branch planted by the Lord in the new creation, right? They're flourishing, they're dwelling there forever. And then we get to chapter 61, verses 1 through 3, where it says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified." Now, why is that passage significant? Well, it's significant because Jesus said, what was it in Luke? Was it Luke 4? Where he stands up and reads this, opens the scroll of Isaiah, reads it in the synagogue, and says, "Today this has been fulfilled in your hearing," right? So Jesus, the first part of these verses, he's saying he's the fulfillment of that promise. But I think what we're also supposed to see is that part of the work of this individual who is proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor is to bring about the transformation so that the people are called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord. And I think that that's fascinating because this is a full transformation from where we started, right? You start in chapter 1, you're dried up oaks whose leaf has withered, you're tinder for fire. In chapter 60, after the servant of the Lord comes, proclaims the year of the Lord's favor, now you're an oak of righteousness and something that the Lord has planted. And so that's where kind of the story culminates. And so I hope for folks as they hear all of this, right, they can see this progress using this imagery really to tell the story of the nation of Israel and how the Lord will ultimately work with them and redeem them through the servant.
Yeah, that's good. So a couple things as I was just So you're thinking about that. Throughout all of that imagery that you gave, it's in the midst of, or the context of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So like the people are in trouble with God.
Right.
And yet what you find throughout it all is interspersed these dendrological, right? Dendrological pictures of hope.
Yeah.
Of one who will come and save and restore. And the reason that struck me is because this morning as I was preparing for Romans 1, 16, 17, where Paul quotes Habakkuk 2.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of studying through Habakkuk this morning, just kind of getting the picture of that. And it's Paul quotes chapter 2, verse 4, but the righteous shall live by his faith.
Mm-hmm.
Or the righteous shall live by faith. And then later on in this passage, he prays, or verse 14 of chapter 2, he says, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the seas. And then chapter 3, verse 2 is, in wrath remember mercy.
Right.
In other words, and that phrase too especially significant, in wrath remember mercy. What we see in so much of these judgment passages of the prophets are hints of gospel goodness that God's going to do, right? The mercy, the grace that you see interspersed, the promise of Jesus that is coming. And I think, too, that's a way to help read the prophets, because sometimes when you come to those in your daily Bible reading, you're like, oh boy.
What a slog.
Yeah, so, but if you use that time as like an opportunity to like be searching for gospel promises, glimmers of hope and light, in wading through all of the wrath of God language, realizing that he's also remembering mercy.
And the severity of the judgment described shows the problem of sin. And then all the passages that speak about hope speaks to just the grace of God, right? Because he spends all the majority of these prophets are judgment and really bleak and dark. But isn't it amazing that after all of that, there's hope, right? That's just pure grace. Yeah. Right? The whole point is they deserve the judgment. They need that. They've earned it, but yet God is choosing to be gracious, to remember his covenant, his steadfast love. Yeah,
that's good. And then the other thing that stuck out to me was clearly in these dendrological passages, it has to be God who does it. If you think about any aspect of growth of a tree, a plant, a weed, grass, whatever, we can plant seeds of different things. You can do that. But only God is the one who can bring about growth. And especially as Isaiah pictures it, just like a dead trees and
where there should be no growth.
There should be no growth, and only God can cause it. So I think there's that understanding then of the gospel that comes in, that this is all going to be a work of God.
Yes.
So in the end, as you go through and see all this, and you see what God does, and you see that transformation, as you were talking about, you're saying, okay, God is the only one who could have done this.
Right.
And I think that's significant because Jesus in John 15, of course, talks about being the vine, right?
Yes.
And he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Yeah. That's the idea, right?
And I was thinking even when Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 1, talking about one plants, another waters, but God gives the growth, right? So
exactly.
It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
In all of these instances, what causes growth? God does.
Right.
And so I think that's what we're to see. Yeah.
I think that's one of the main, obviously, using that terminology that they use and using this idea of dendrological illustrations is clear to show this comes from God.
Yeah.
It's going to be God's work.
Yeah.
That's good.
Cool. Well, hopefully this has been helpful to people, and maybe they can understand the prophets a little bit better. I would add one other thing just for as you're reading the prophets and looking for this imagery, you do want to you got to look at the context to understand it, right? I think that's the problem. We miss the context. So you got to figure out who it is that is being spoken of as the image, right? And then that will help you understand it better. And then the other thing too, you'll see the same imagery used through all the prophets. They all use it just in different ways. So,
good.
But we hope it's helpful for you. Our podcast is designed hopefully to provoke you to thinking and to encourage you in your walk with the Lord. We love to hear from our listeners, so you can send us an email at thecalvarycast@gmail.com. If you're part of our church, you can just come up and talk to us. You can call us or text us. That's one of the benefits of being a Calvary Cast Plus subscriber. If you live in Grand Junction, it's an additional benefit. But we hope it's helpful for you. We love to hear from you. At Calvary, we exist for the glory of God, the good of his people, and the Great Commission. So until next time.